Welcome to What's Your History, the podcast that covers all areas of history, heritage and archaeology, no matter how big or how small, how well known or how niche. Today my guest is Molly Anderson. She is a historian, but also she is very much into the heritage sector and very interested in that sort of thing as well. Museum management, all about creation of that sort of thing, curator and all wonderful stuff like that. So yeah, hello Molly.
Hi Kaylee, thank you for that lovely introduction. I feel quite special now.
You are very special. Every historian's special.
Yeah, well, we have to be, don't we, for the work that we do for our sins. You know, it's it's an interesting thing to do. It's not always the most rewarding or best paid. So it's, we have to be special people.
Yes. So you said that you wanted to talk about heritage management today, but you've also just mentioned that you also opened up your own exhibition last year, was it?
So last year I was between my undergraduate degree in history and my master's in heritage management, and I had some free time. I was working part-time at a cafe and I was like, well, I just need some history. So I thought, well, why not do something on my own? And I was just about to move out of my parents' house, and I grew up in this lovely little village and I knew everyone. And I thought, why don't I do a little exhibition on the history of the village? You know, we don't have a local sort of museum or anywhere for the villages that I grew up in. And so I did. I spent about 3 or 4 months researching and in the archives all the time. Online and speaking to locals as well, which I thought was really important, getting these sort of oral testimonies. And I curated and put together this little exhibition, pop-up sort of thing, in a local village hall, and it had an amazing turnout and I absolutely loved it. So I would love to do something like that again now that I've moved out of that village and onto different paths. Now I'm doing a master's. But yeah, it was a really rewarding experience, actually.
And what's your master's focusing on? Is it focusing on heritage management, or is that just one subject in the master's?
So the master's is a heritage management course. It's with Queen Mary in East London, but it's in partnership with historic royal palaces. So that means that I do placements and workshops at the palaces. So Hampton Court, Tower of London, Kensington Palace. And then I might next year be at Kew or Banqueting House a little bit as well. So it's an amazing experience to be with an incredible organisation like HRP alongside a good London uni. So yeah, the degree is heritage management, and I'm currently specialising in risk management within that.
And for our listeners' sakes, because a lot of people might not fully understand heritage management, because when it comes to the heritage world, there's more to it than going into a museum and seeing the lovely things on display. A lot of things have to be considered, just like with anywhere else. You need to do risk assessments, make sure your objects are safe and what have you. Would you like to explain a bit more what it means to do heritage management?
Well, I mean, I know that you have an archaeology background and you work in museums, and it's different, but there's a lot of overlap with heritage sites. So when you go to museums, it is all about, the artifacts in the cases with their descriptions, and I'm sure every case has to be temperature controlled and everything has to be, managed and scrutinized, and you don't want any risks to the objects. And in heritage sites, it's very similar, that you've got these living, breathing places or palaces, some of which might be lived in still. I work at Nebworth House in Hertfordshire, and the family who've lived there for 500 years still live there. It's a difficult balance, having visitors in all the time, which poses risks to these sites. And so heritage management as a whole is everything that needs to go on for these sites to be open to the public and running and still standing, and fighting all the battles that they have to fight today. Not medieval battles, but battles against climate change or the pandemic, or we've seen with Stonehenge the activism that took place in, was it June?
I think so, yeah.
There's a lot going on, a lot that we have to think about alongside the day-to-day being open to the public and the normal operations of a public site. So it's a big thing.
Yeah. And what was it about heritage management that made you go, this is what I want to study, this is what I want to go into further? Because a lot of people who go into the history world, they go, one day I'm going to be a curator, and you've gone, yeah, I'm going to do heritage management.
No, I initially was, I'm going to be a curator, and maybe I still will, because curation is a big part of heritage management. But I did my history degree up in Lancaster during the pandemic, and I loved it. And I did a lot of local history as my research, which then facilitated the little exhibition that I did. But I kind of thought, actually, rather than doing a history master's, I want to do something that's a little bit more almost vocational, that might help me get a job in a museum or a heritage site that's a little bit more practical. And I was just looking at courses, and I found this one, Heritage Management at Queen Mary with Historic Royal Palaces. And I thought, that's amazing. I get to be, in Hampton Court Palace and learning, and I can work with Lucy Worsley and Tracy Borman, and I could be the next one of them, and it would be amazing. So I was a bit starstruck and a bit like, oh, this is it. And so, yeah, that's the path I took. It's definitely a great course. I recommend it. Whether I end up being a curator or not, we'll see. But it's definitely giving me great insight into the runnings and the difficulties and the opportunities as well for heritage sites.
And are you thinking, once you've finished the masters, because I know masters are very stressful, are you thinking of trying to get into a job, or are you going to then maybe go on to do a PhD and maybe another sector to do with it, or anything like that?
I think I'll start off in a job. I'm sure, like many people in academia, there comes a time where you go, actually, I just need to be earning money. So I think once I finish the masters, a job in a heritage site or a museum, and then maybe further down the line, a PhD. It would be quite nice to have a PhD.
Wonderful. And in regards to your masters at the moment, are you at your dissertation stage now?
Not yet. So I decided to do my masters part-time for a couple of reasons. Partly because I do it in London and I don't live in London. The commute is a bit of a faff. But also I'm working part-time as well. So I'm currently, like I said, at Nebworth House in Hertfordshire. But I've done, writing jobs and freelance things and little curation jobs as well, and a little bit of volunteering. So yeah, it's about trying lots of different things at the moment, I think. And so yeah, I'll be writing my dissertation this time next year.
Fair enough. So I kind of stumbled across Molly's account on Instagram. You do a lot of wonderful history posts on that as well. So what encouraged you to want to start that? Is it because you just have a love for the history and you're just like, I want to share it, or was it because you saw other people and you're like, oh, I can do that as well? What kind of made you want to start sharing your love of history?
Well, I think it started in lockdown. It's the first lockdown, and I was at home, and I wasn't at uni. I was doing uni from home for a term, and I thought, well, I miss people. I miss historical sites. I used to go to castles as often as I could. So why don't I've got so many pictures as well of all of these places I've been to, and I want to put them somewhere. So I was like, well, I'll set up an Instagram. I'll start putting my pictures there, almost as like a personal record of all these places. And then all of a sudden it like took off, because I think so many people were doing the same as me, or people who liked castles and museums and things found my account, and it just really grew. And I found so many other people like yourself, and other people who post about things like I do, and it became something I was just doing all the time. So yeah, I sort of fell into it a bit. Now so it's Instagram and TikTok that I do, but I don't do anywhere near as much as I used to on there, because inevitably work and things get in the way. But yeah, it's just a lockdown hobby, really.
Oh, that's really cool. And so with all the sort of things that you are posting, because you are posting about historical sites and you yourself work in historical buildings and stuff, is that always been something of interest? Is buildings, or are you interested in periods and queens and stuff? Because I know there's loads of people on Instagram, but everybody has like their little niche that they focus on. So you've obviously got the accounts that are Henry VIII and his 6 wives. There's like loads of those and stuff like that.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, in regard for you personally, what do you gravitate more towards? Is it the historical sites like castles and stately homes and stuff, or is it the more personal stories, or is it the royals, or is it just like an amalgamation of them, all of them?
I think, again, with everyone, your area of expertise and interest does change. And I think I began as really little, just an absolute love of historic buildings. I grew up in a Tudor house. My parents' house was a little Tudor house.
Oh wow.
And I remember, yeah, it was an old pub actually, which featured quite a lot in the exhibition that I did, because it's been a pub. The soldiers were there during the Second World War. There's an American camp nearby, so they were there at the pub. It was a farm, and so this history that I grew up with, I always was like, oh, if the walls could talk. And my parents would take me to historical places, and I'd just be like amazed that so much has happened in these places. So I think I've always had an interest in the places more than the people specifically. So some people are really fascinated about specific kings and queens, and I think I did go through that phase, but I just get a huge sense of history when you're in the place where it happened. So yeah, I think I currently it's a love of those buildings. I think that's something that's stuck with me the whole time. But the interest in the period, or a period in particular, or a person in particular, does sort of come and go, I think. But we'll see. Maybe I just need to find the next historical person that will fascinate me.
So in the houses that you have been working on for your masters, and even the house that you're currently working in, what is it about those places? I know you can't really choose when you're on placement; they kind of just put you places. But what is it about those places that has got you really interested in them? Is it this? Yeah.
I think it's the stories. I mean, like I said, so at Nebworth House in Hertfordshire, the family have lived there for over 500 years, and they've got so many interesting characters in their family history, and each person that's lived in that house has added something or changed something, whether it be architecture, or they've been a politician or a suffragette, or all sorts of people that give these houses life, and they make really good stories to tell visitors. And I think that's what grabs me. And yeah, every site that I've worked in and that will work in and that I visit as a tourist has that, which I think is quite magical. What about you? What do you think about these sort of places? How do you feel in these places?
I feel the same, I'd say, yeah. I'm very much in the frame of mind of like, if these walls could talk, what would they tell us? And in some places, like the ruins and stuff, it saddens me. I love that we get to see them and that we have them, but again, the stories of just their downfall, it would just be like really heartbreaking. But yeah. It's like in those situations, it's kind of like if the walls could talk, would they be having a sigh of relief of going, right, no one's bothering me no more, or would they be going, I used to be great?
Oh, I've never thought of that. I've never really thought about if they had opinions on what had happened. That's really interesting. Because I think, some places must be like, oh no, we were once an amazing palace and now we're a ruin. And some places might think, actually, we've been overtaken by nature and we've got vines growing out of places and a tree growing in the middle of the Great Hall and whatever. I think those places are really peaceful. That's a really interesting thought, actually. I'd never really viewed it like that.
Yeah, it's like also if you think about it, like in regards to say like Catherine Howard, for example, and the scandal of her having an affair and stuff. It's like if you could put a building into a court case, what would they tell you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just.
That would be How many mysteries from the past would we be able to solve if the buildings could be a witness in that trial?
Yeah, just be like, did they really do this? Well, I was there, so. But yeah, I do. Yeah, it's the personal stories I like. I think it's, 'cause at the end of the day, it's the people that make history, and if it wasn't for us, then history wouldn't be a thing, really.
No.
And
they build these places as well, don't they? I mean, I was thinking about Notre Dame recently because obviously there was the fire in 2019. The craftsmanship of building places like this has been unknown for us, really. In their rebuild and their restoration of Notre Dame, they're learning how it was built and how certain things are still standing. And they've got big metal staples, iron staples, holding bits together that they hadn't seen before because something else was in the way. And so, these places are built by people, and it's only through being in them and studying them and exploring them that we actually get a better understanding of people from the past, as well as, just architecture.
Yeah. And I suppose that's what feeds into what you do as well with your heritage management. Because by what you're doing is you're making sure that these things can keep lasting, can keep telling their stories in their own way. Because as much as it's lovely to have people coming to see these places, and museums definitely need it, and stately homes definitely need it, people don't know how to behave. People touch things that they shouldn't be touching.
Absolutely they do. I had a man poking a suit of armor today, and I was like, excuse me, no. Why are you poking it? But it's also, people don't always mean to do things, and even just benevolently, people breathing in these historic buildings, people walking through with dirty shoes or literally just breathing has an impact. The dehumidifiers that need emptying constantly, just because people, there's a lot of footfall of people coming through these rooms. So yeah, not everything that the visitors do is malevolent. It's just the joys of being open to the public, which is what we're supposed to do. Heritage is for everyone, and it should be accessible. It's an opportunity as well as a challenge.
Yeah, it is that really fine line though between, because it is lovely to see these things, and it's the same like when you go into an like a museum warehouse or an archive, and you see all the things, and you're just like, that's your choices. You either have them on display so people can see them and risk them getting some sort of damage from just the environment and things like that, or they get kept in boxes for no one to see, and you've got these wonderful things that no one ever sees. And it's like, well, what's the point of having it then if no one's going to see it? Well,
No.
Yeah.
Well, on that vein, I mean, that was something that always inspired me to get into sort of curation or heritage or archive work, is the joy of being able to see what's in those boxes that the public don't get to see. And as a curator, the amount of power you have to decide what the public see and how they see it, how they interpret it. That's actually, I've always felt a little bit power hungry when I thought about that. I was like, oh my gosh, I could be the person that decides if people see this artifact or not, which is maybe not the right attitude to have as a curator, but there's a lot in storage that people don't get to see. Which then the other point I was going to make on that is thinking about like the British Museum scandal. Was it last year that it's like 2,000 objects went missing or stolen or damaged? That even these objects that are in storage aren't necessarily safe. And I know it's a whole different issue, but it's one of the challenges of how we look after, how we store historic artifacts.
Yeah, I think in regards to that, and especially with regards to the British Museum's been around for a really long time, and their backlog is just so huge. It's like, it doesn't matter how much you try and get on top of it, you're always going to be like at least like 50 years behind, because of like the new stuff that keeps coming in, and it's very hard to get on top of it in nearly every museum across the country. has the same issue. Maybe with the exception of art galleries, because there's an art gallery I know of in York where they're actually on top of their stuff.
Amazing.
I know.
How do they do it?
I don't know. I think they've just got a really good system and they manage to track everything they have. But most museums are just, because they're constantly getting new stuff coming in, because lovely people want to donate stuff, and then you have that weird line of going, oh, how do we say no? We've got too many of this, and oh, we've already got this to do, and yeah, it kind of just keeps piling and piling. So as much as it's extremely horrible that that person took the advantage, that is that the fact that they weren't catalogued, unfortunately that's just the truth of most archives and collections and stuff.
Yeah, but it's the issue. A lot of it's human error as well. I think it's just something we know happens in heritage sites and museums, is that things do go missing, or things are not in the places they're supposed to be. You know, you might have a lovely artifact in a box on a shelf labeled, and someone might move it, and you know it's there somewhere, but you don't know where it's gone, and that's human error. But also with in terms of accessioning and de-accessioning of artifacts, there's the debate that we are still making history, aren't we? Yeah. Everything we do is making more history, and everything we use is an artifact that would probably be in a museum at some point. And so a lot of museums are collecting fairly modern things, but they don't have the space for it, obviously, or the capabilities to catalogue it all and look after it all. And yeah, it's the whole debate about space, and also the energy that costs, and the costs of it, and sustainability of it all is all a big debate about risk and sustainability in the future, which is a very difficult one in museums and heritage.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of these sort of things going around. So like a few years ago there was the Windrush scandal of people from the Windrush generation, because all the documentation hadn't been properly archived, or they decided they wanted to go digital. I don't know the full ins of it, but due to that lack of a paper trail, it meant a lot of people were then getting deported back to, well, wasn't even their original home, you know, because they'd been living in Britain for however long. And it is one of those weird things, and it's just, I think we're getting to a point where we're getting too reliant on technology. Because as much as it's a lot easier to go on a computer and go, okay, so this says it's blah, blah, blah. I know that's a lot easier, but I think we do need to have a paper trail to go with it as well. Because there's just, things get lost. And like you said, there's people error as well, where, you know, you get new people coming in and they might not carry on the system that the old person did, or the way that this other person did it had it in their own way. So they might say item 593 through whatever, whereas the next person will go, that's a book. You know, it's stuff like that. So it's like, what the hell is this 533? There's all that sort of thing as well.
It's difficult. Yeah, but then, you know, paper has its own limitations and vulnerabilities, you know, archive fires and all sorts of different things. So I think technology is a good thing, but it's, with all of these museums who have a backlog and are struggling with the amount of things in their collection, to then catalogue it all is such a mammoth process that it's never done in quite the right way. It's the issue. And with the Windrush scandal, I think the lack of paperwork there was taken advantage of by the powers that be, in a quite a malicious way, to do what they wanted to do. But yeah, these issues of a lack of a paper trail, do you say, are vulnerable to sort of benevolent and malevolent forces.
Yeah. On the flip side, in regards to like archives and finding stuff, though, I remember seeing this video on YouTube that was talking about the National Museum, the National History Museum, down in London, and this was during the pandemic, so obviously things weren't opening or anything like that, and yeah, I thought this was really interesting because they did a video about, so we found this new dinosaur that was in our collection that we didn't know existed.
Yeah. Natural History Museum. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is crazy. These things just turn up that people don't know about. But that's the thing, is that some archivist knew about it, and then, you know, then they died or retired or whatever, and then they got lost. We're always discovering new things. You know, there was Thomas Cromwell's book of, I can't remember what it was now, there's in a painting of him, and then they found the original one. Which is it's amazing for the history world. Everyone gets so excited, but these things are always coming up. From a building point of view, so if you're at a historic building, and like I said, that there are layers underneath of like what different people in the past have done, like their decorations, and quite often you find layers of old wall painting or wallpaper or little things hidden underneath newer layers of plaster that we only really find when there's like a water leak or a damp problem or something that reveals, the plaster falls down and you see a new layer underneath. So it's not just archive collections, but it's the buildings themselves that are holding these secrets of history that we just sort of stumble on at some point. That I always say that we need all of the damp problems to happen in the right places, so that we find all of the beautiful Tudor wallpaper or something. So it's an opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah. It is really cool what you're actually able to find. It's like the Bronte Parsonage Museum in Haworth. They did an analysis on their walls because obviously the house that they live in is where the Bronte family lived in, and the museum itself is all about their collection. So they were trying to have a better understanding of what was actually like at the time when the Brontes were there, because they were given letters from people that have donated letters and things, and the people would have descriptions of what their house looked like when they were there. So they'd be like, oh, it has duck blue walls and stuff. But at the time when it was a museum, those didn't exist no more. So I think it was in 2012, maybe a bit later, they did some analysis on the walls to find out, okay, so what was the colour system at the time when the Brontes were here? And they managed to also find a book that had some wallpaper samples in it that Charlotte had sent off to people and stuff. So it is really cool how things like that go hand in hand, and it's lovely that buildings need to be cared for just as much as the items need to, because they tell the full story at the end of the day. And it is one of those things that does need protecting in all ways, shape and form that we can possibly do, whether that be a paper trail or doing humidity checks or even checking out the pests. The fun task of pest checks.
The pests. The pests. Yeah, but that's the thing, is that these buildings aren't airtight, places. They're not in a vacuum. We can't protect them from everything, and so there are moths and silverfish and damp and all sorts of things that just we have to deal with. But technology is making great advancements and making it even more exciting. We can figure out layers underneath newer layers of wallpaper through technology and scanning things now, or there's machines that can scan individual fibers of a tapestry to see the makeup of that and how it's surviving, how it's holding up. So it's quite incredible. I mean, you were talking to Leah before on a previous podcast about tapestry conservation, and it's incredibly technical now. The technology and the resources for conservation, preventative or interventive, is incredible. It's something that scares me a little bit because I'm a bit of a technophobe.
I don't like technology as well. It does scare me. I'm very much in the old way. But yeah, it is.
And here you are doing a podcast. So.
I know. I take advantage of this sort of technology. But
we have to.
Yeah. But no, it is really good because, again, like you were saying, it's like they did some scanning at Pompeii, for example, and they were able to find hidden rooms because it was like bricked up sections and stuff, and they found hidden rooms from scanning it and things. So I suppose with everything, there's pros and cons to technology. There's pros and cons to how you manage or run a site and things like that as well. In regards to your heritage management, what have you found has been like the biggest challenge while actually working in that field?
I think, on a day-to-day basis, working in a heritage site, it is, the day-to-day, the health and safety, the impact of visitors, things like that, just operations. But overarchingly, I think for heritage, it is climate change. I think the National Trust said last year that climate change is their single biggest threat, and these sites are more and more being affected by this sort of thing, and so it's increasing pest cycles and damp problems, water ingress with the amount of rainfall, cloudburst incidents. So even thinking about heritage gardens and sustainability, about what we're growing and irrigation and water usage, things. So it's a huge impact. It's a huge thing that is a risk and a threat. We have to sort of change our ways really to work around it and to adapt to it really.
Yeah. Oh well, there's only so much we can do about that. I think. There's I do see a lot of sad things online about that stuff, and it says it's all well and good you doing your recycling or having your no meat Mondays or whatever it is you choose to do to try and help. At the end of the day, you're only a small percentage of the pyramid. It's the ones at the top that really need to make the biggest impact, because they're the ones that are causing the most damage.
Absolutely.
But
yeah,
we'll keep doing what we can. We always have.
We have to, don't we? Yeah. Absolutely, we do. It's a difficult one, but I mean, I was looking at Stonehenge. Obviously, earlier this year there was the Just Stop Oil protest there, which is activism. That's a risk in itself. But thinking about Stonehenge as a site, it's a really difficult balance with trying to allow it to be open to the public, and it's also a ritual site, a religious site for some people, while also managing the damages that these people do to these sites. That I think the English Heritage looked at, I think it was 22 or something, risks or issues that they were facing, and most of them were because of human impact and the environment. People walking around causes the land to move, which could mean a stone could topple. People getting close to them, breathing on them. The paint they used in the Just Stop Oil protest, yes, it might not have damaged the rock, but it would damage the lichen that was in it and on it. So there's so much to think about, climate related and people related.
Yeah.
For these places, which is different from museums. I suppose museums have similar worries and risks, but I think with these sort of more living and breathing sites, they have that extra worry, or we have that extra worry about them.
Yeah. I remember when I went to Stonehenge, we had a security guard following us around so we didn't touch the stones. And obviously we got like this, we didn't actually touch them, but we got as close as possible, like, yeah, as if this is going to cause any damage. But yeah, he was like following us around like a shadow. But yeah, it saddens me that people try and do that. And I know it's to cause an impact and it's to make things change and stuff. But when it comes to those sort of impacts, I don't understand what they're trying to get at, because if anything, people are not going to support your cause. They're just going to hate you for it, because the one thing that people, even though a lot of people don't fully understand the ins and outs of it, and a lot of it probably take it for granted, but the one thing we can all collectively agree on is we love and care about our heritage. Maybe not to the same extreme as going, I will pay loads of money to help you. We do take it for granted, I will admit, but otherwise, the heritage industry would be frigging loaded. But we do still care about it. It's the one thing that during the pandemic we all gravitated towards. It was the one thing we're like, this is what we want to do. We want to see these sites again. And like you were saying, like your outlet during the pandemic was to post about all the lovely places you've been to, and I was the same as well. I was like, I've been to places, I'll post about these places. Just to kind of, I don't know, to rub it in, I guess. It's like, I'm not going to see you again.
Oh, yeah, it was a difficult one. It was bittersweet, wasn't it? I just had to keep going back and looking at pictures I had of Audley End House in Essex, or Anglesey Abbey in Cambridgeshire, or wherever, and being like, I want to go back. So yeah, it's we love these places. They are important to us. As heritage is what we've inherited from the past, and it's important that we maintain these for future generations. But it is only when something happens that we realise that we take it for granted, whether that be a pandemic or activism or terrorism or anything that jeopardizes these sites. We realise how important they are to us.
Yeah. So we've been talking for about 35 minutes. Is there anything else you want to talk about in regards to your heritage management qualification, or anything else you feel about heritage that people need to know about, aside from please love it more, care for it more?
Yeah, love it, care for it. Yeah, do whatever you can to support heritage. Visit these places, buy things from the gift shop, whatever it takes. But just enjoy it and find what it is about heritage and history that calls to you and interests you. Whether that's, for me, if walls could talk, or if it's kings and queens or battles or anything. Is to find that you love and help drive your support of history and heritage. But also, I think finally a thing to say is that risk in heritage is a big thing, and I think from someone who's quite an anxious person, I think it's quite a good discipline to be in is risk management in heritage sites, because you need to be worrying about everything. It actually pays to be a warrior here because there's a lot of risk. There's health and safety, operations risk, the impact of visitors. There's conservation, like you discussed with Leah about tapestries on a previous episode. There's reputational risk. You want your visitors to love your site and talk about it and go away, and you also want to put on exhibitions and curate things that are going to go down well with the public and with the press. There's politics involved, there's stakeholders, there's so much that people have to worry about, just for us to go and visit a nice castle or a museum or a heritage site and have a good day out. So I appreciate it. I think is my final thing, is appreciate the work that goes into your nice trip to a castle or wherever, because it's very special.
Yeah, even more so than people realise. So,
yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and talking a bit more about the behind the scenes of the heritage world, rather than just about kings and queens, which is lovely. But you're talking about more the behind the scenes bits, which we also need to know about. So I'm really grateful that you decided to come onto this podcast. And thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been really fun to sort of, vent about how much I love it and also how much it of a big deal it is. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
You're very welcome. So thank you, Molly. I'm going to sign us off now. Thank you again.